Welcome. In this session, we're going to explore friction through the lens of behavioral science, not as a UX buzzword, but as a predictable, measurable barrier to action grounded in decades of research in consumer psychology and decision science. Most organizations assume that if customers aren't converting, the issue must be messaging, pricing, or product. But behavioral research consistently shows that the biggest barriers to action are often much smaller and more subtle. A moment of hesitation, a confusing step, a poorly structured choice, or a cognitive burden the customer can't articulate. To understand friction properly, we draw on several foundational theories. Fogg's behavior model tells us that behavior happens when motivation, ability, and a trigger converge. Friction directly reduces ability, and when ability drops, behavior collapses, even when motivation is high. Cognitive load theory reminds us that working memory is limited. When an experience demands too much mental effort, too many choices, too much text, unclear hierarchy, people disengage. Prospect theory explains emotional friction. People are loss-averse, and uncertainty feels like a potential loss. If a step feels ambiguous or risky, customers default to inaction. And choice overload, demonstrated in the famous JAM study, shows that too many options reduce the likelihood of choosing anything at all. What all of these theories reveal is that friction is not a design flaw, it's a behavioral force. And when you understand friction at this level, you gain the ability to design experiences that align with how people actually think and decide. In this session, we'll break friction into 4 types: cognitive, emotional, procedural, and social, and explore how each one affects behavior. You'll learn how to diagnose friction using behavioral principles and how to reduce it using evidence-based design strategies. The goal is simple: help you remove the barriers that prevent customers from doing what they already want to do. Friction is any barrier, cognitive, emotional, procedural, or social, that disrupts the behavioral flow. In behavioral science, friction is closely related to the concept of ability in Fogg's behavior model. When ability decreases, behavior becomes less likely, even if motivation is high. Friction also aligns with cognitive load theory, which tells us that working memory has strict limits. When an experience exceeds those limits, through complexity, ambiguity, or excessive information, people disengage. What makes friction so dangerous is that it's often invisible to the people who built the experience. This is known as the curse of knowledge. Once you understand something, it becomes difficult to imagine what it's like not to understand it. Teams unintentionally design for themselves, not for the cognitive realities of their customers. And friction doesn't need to be large to have a large effect. Behavioral economics shows us that small barriers can produce disproportionately large behavioral changes, a principle sometimes referred to as sludge in nudge theory. Understanding friction requires shifting from a product-centric mindset to a behavior-centric one. It's not about what you intended, it's about what the customer experiences in the moment of decision. A helpful way to conceptualize friction is through a behavioral equation: behavior equals sign motivation, friction. This echoes both Fogg's behavior model and Lewin's field theory, which frame behavior as the result of driving and restraining forces. Motivation pushes people toward action. Friction pulls them away. And what decades of research show is that friction often outweighs motivation. Even highly motivated consumers abandon tasks when friction is introduced, a phenomenon supported by prospect theory, which shows that people are disproportionately sensitive to losses, effort, and uncertainty. Conversely, reducing friction can dramatically increase behavior even when motivation is modest. This is why friction reduction is often more effective than persuasion. Persuasion tries to increase motivation. Friction reduction increases ability, and ability is often the stronger determinant of behavior. Friction also compounds across steps. This aligns with sequential decision-making theory, which shows that small disruptions accumulate, increasing cognitive fatigue and reducing persistence. Understanding this compounding effect is essential for designing experiences that support rather than interrupt behavior. Friction comes in 4 primary forms, each grounded in well-established behavioral theories. Cognitive friction arises when an experience exceeds the limits of working memory. This is explained by cognitive load theory, Hick's law, decision time increases with number of choices, and dual process theory, which shows that people default to fast, intuitive thinking unless forced into slow, effortful thinking. Emotional friction is rooted in prospect theory and effect heuristics. When something feels uncertain or risky, people avoid it, even if the objective risk is low. Emotional friction also includes trust deficits, which are explained by signaling theory and uncertainty reduction theory. Procedural friction is the literal effort required to complete a task. This aligns with effort discounting, which shows that people devalue outcomes that require more effort, and temporal discounting, which shows that people avoid tasks that feel time-consuming. Social friction arises from social norms theory, identity theory, and impression management. People avoid behaviors that conflict with identity or risk social judgment. When you understand these categories, you can diagnose friction with far more precision and design interventions that target the specific behavioral barrier. Diagnosing friction requires a structured behavioral audit, a method grounded in behavioral diagnostics, journey mapping, and cognitive task analysis. Stop by mapping the journey step by step. This aligns with sequential processing theory, which shows that behavior unfolds in stages, each with its own cognitive demands. Then identify moments where customers hesitate, slow down, or drop off. These micro moments are where friction hides. Research on micro behaviors shows that hesitation is often a precursor to abandonment. Next, evaluate each step through the customer's mental model. This draws on schema theory, which explains how people use mental frameworks to interpret experiences. When a step violates expectations, friction increases. Finally, look for cognitive load, ambiguity, or unnecessary effort. These are the behavioral signatures of friction. A behavioral audit reveals that friction is rarely caused by one big problem. It's usually the accumulation of small, subtle barriers that compound into abandonment, a phenomenon supported by cumulative cognitive load theory. Cognitive friction is one of the most powerful and most underestimated drivers of abandonment. Choice overload, demonstrated in the famous Iyengar and Leper-Jam study, shows that too many options reduce purchase likelihood. This is explained by Hick's law and decision fatigue. Too much text creates cognitive fatigue, which is grounded in working memory theory. The brain can only hold about 4 to 7 chunks of information at once. Anything beyond that overwhelms processing capacity. Unclear hierarchy fragments attention. This aligns with selective attention theory and signal detection theory, which show that people need clear visual cues to know where to focus. Poor framing leads to misinterpretation. Framing effects, a core component of prospect theory, show that the way information is presented shapes how it is understood. The brain is constantly trying to conserve energy. When an experience feels mentally effortful, people disengage. This is why simplifying choices, clarifying hierarchy, and reducing cognitive load can dramatically increase conversion, even when nothing else changes. Emotional friction is the friction people feel but cannot articulate. It's the hesitation that arises when something feels uncertain, risky, or unfamiliar. This is grounded in prospect theory, which shows that losses loom larger than gains. When customers sense ambiguity, they perceive potential loss, even if the actual risk is low. Lack of trust triggers avoidance. This aligns with trust heuristics, signaling theory, and uncertainty reduction theory. When trust signals are weak or inconsistent, customers default to inaction. Ambiguity creates fear of loss. This is supported by ambiguity aversion, which shows that people prefer known risks over unknown ones. Inconsistent cues reduce confidence. This aligns with cognitive dissonance theory. When elements of an experience don't align, people feel discomfort and withdraw. Reducing emotional friction means increasing clarity, building trust, and reinforcing confidence. It means designing experiences that feel safe, predictable, and aligned with customer expectations. Procedural friction is the literal effort required to complete a task. An effort is one of the strongest predictors of abandonment. This is grounded in effort discounting, which shows that people devalue outcomes that require more effort, and temporal discounting, which shows that people avoid tasks that feel time-consuming. Every additional step, every additional field, every additional second increases the likelihood that customers will drop off. This aligns with Fogg's behavior model, where ability decreases as effort increases. But procedural friction isn't just about the number of steps, it's about sequencing. Peak end rule research shows that the final moments of an experience disproportionately shape memory and satisfaction. If the last step introduces unexpected effort, customers feel betrayed. Reducing procedural friction means designing flows that feel effortless, predictable, and respectful of the customer's time. Social friction arises when a behavior conflicts with identity, norms, or expectations. People don't just make decisions as individuals. They make decisions as members of social groups. This is grounded in social identity theory, normative influence, and impression management. Fear of judgment reduces action. Research on evaluation apprehension shows that people avoid behaviors that risk negative evaluation. Identity conflict is a powerful barrier. Self-perception theory and identity-based motivation show that people avoid behaviors that feel inconsistent with who they believe they are. Social norms shape behavior more strongly than personal preferences. This is supported by Cialdini's norm theory and descriptive versus injunctive norms. Understanding social friction allows you to design experiences that feel aligned with identity, supported by norms, and free of judgment. Reducing friction is not about making things pretty. It's about making them behaviorally aligned. Simplifying choices draws on choice architecture and Hick's law. Clarifying hierarchy draws on Gestalt principles and selective attention theory. Reducing cognitive load draws on cognitive load theory and dual process theory. Increasing trust signals draws on signaling theory and uncertainty. Reduction theory. Sequencing effort strategically draws on peak end rule, goal gradient theory, and temporal discounting. These principles are grounded in behavioral science, but they are deeply practical. They help you design experiences that feel intuitive, effortless, and aligned with how people naturally behave. Let's look at a simple example, a landing page with high click-through but low conversion. Analytics tells you the pattern. Behavioral science tells you why. The page had too much text, leading to cognitive friction, as cognitive load theory dictates. The value proposition was unclear, resulting in emotional friction, according to prospect theory. The form was long, which aligns with procedural friction, consistent with effort discounting. The design cues were inconsistent, and that's the epitome of social friction. That's impression management. By simplifying the text, clarifying the value, reducing the form fields, and aligning the visual cues, conversion increased dramatically, not because motivation changed, but because friction decreased. This is the power of behavioral design. Small changes, grounded in theory, produce large behavioral effects. Friction is the silent killer of conversion. But when you understand friction behaviorally, cognitively, emotionally, procedurally, and socially, you gain the ability to design experiences that support rather than interrupt customer behavior. Reducing friction is one of the highest ROI actions any business can take. It doesn't require more budget, more ads, or more persuasion. It requires understanding how people actually behave and designing accordingly. Thank you for joining me. I hope this session gives you a deeper appreciation for how behavioral science can transform your marketing and customer experience, and why designing for behavior is one of the most powerful strategic advantages available to any organization.